It is time, of course, for the press preview. A first look at the front pages as they arrive. Over the remainder of the hour, we'll be taking a look at what's making the headlines with Matthew Syed, columnist at the Sunday Times, and Christina Patterson, journalist and author. But first, let's take you through the front pages that we have. Some of them may be a little bit delayed because of the football. But here's the Sunday Telegraph. It's reporting the Prime Minister's wedding to his fiancée in a secret ceremony at Westminster Cathedral early today, saying that even close aides were kept in the dark. A lab leak in Wuhan is a feasible cause of the global COVID pandemic, according to British intelligence sources quoted in the Sunday Times. They also report the Prime Ministerial wedding, pointing out he is the first serving PM to get married in 199 years. Writing in The Observer, the Labour leader, Keir Starmer, claims that the Prime Minister's botches could delay plans to lift COVID restrictions in June. As mentioned, we're joined by Matthew Syed and Christina Patterson. Lovely to see you both again. It has been a little while. So, Christina, let's start with you, shall we? On the front page of The Observer, we just mentioned it in the paper stack there. Sir Keir Starmer is warning that things might not be going entirely according to the roadmap, and there's one person that he's blaming for that.
Yes, well, no great surprise that he's blaming Boris Johnson, as indeed did Boris Johnson's number one man, or until recently number one man, this week, Dominic Cummings, in 7 hours of testimony to various select committees. I must say, this Indian variant it's very, very worrying, and it does feel like déjà vu all over again, in that it seems to have been the case that the government actually knew about the Indian variant and how dangerous it was, or at least how infectious it was, in very early April. But it was at least 2 weeks. It was 2 weeks before they announced that they would make India a red country. And then they had hundreds of flights pouring in from India in the days before they actually implemented that. So this does feel, it feels very depressing. We've all waited so long to have any kind of taste of normality again. And a number of scientists, including one, as you've been mentioning on your news bulletins, who was very influential in introducing the first lockdown last year after his mathematical modelling showed how dangerous it would be to not lock down, has said we need to be careful. The scientists are a number of them are sounding a lot of alarm bells. So I just hope that Boris Johnson on this occasion will err on the side of caution. At the moment, most of us can do plenty of things we couldn't do before. We can see friends inside, we can go to restaurants, we can go to cafes, we can go to pubs, we can go to bars. I think businesses need to be supported for a few extra weeks until more of the adult population has had 2 vaccines, because 2 vaccines are necessary to protect against the Indian variant. And then let's just hope and pray that that gets us through this, because it's been so long now, and I think we're all desperate to get out of it.
Yeah, Matthew, I suppose it would take a degree of political will for the Prime Minister to delay the roadmap as he set out. I mean, events around the Westfield Shopping Centre in London today, that protest march, that March for Freedom shows, there's not necessarily a majority of people who want everything to open up back now, but there's certainly a sizable number of people who want him to stick to the plan.
Well, in an ideal world, we all want him to stick to the plan, providing it doesn't lead to an exponential increase in cases, which, given the data we've seen in recent days, seems to be likely, as Tim Gowers has said. I think, for all it's worth, I think the majority of the population is very cautious about COVID. I mean, you're right, there are people who are we're all anti-lockdown. The question is whether we do it early and in a timely fashion, and therefore can keep some of the economy open, or whether we wait too long and therefore have to shut down harder and for longer with a higher number of excess deaths. But I think the instinct of a large number of people in this country, almost from the beginning, has been pretty cautious, notwithstanding occasional demonstrations. So I think the sensible political decision for Johnson is something that he hasn't done terribly well so far, which is take the medium-term view.
Christina, take us to the Sunday Telegraph. I mean, the headline kind of points you in the correct direction for the story. Fresh questions for Matt Hancock over care homes. One suspects those questions are related to testing or the lack thereof of people being moved into care homes.
Yeah, well, it's been a very bad week for Matt Hancock, but not nearly as bad as for the relatives of all those who died in care homes. I think we knew already that people were released from hospitals into care homes without being tested, and then that caused vast numbers of infections and vast numbers of deaths. There's no surprise there. It was tragic, but no surprise because we knew that already. It's been very hard to know the precise numbers because in those early months the testing wasn't available. I think the key issue here is, as Dominic Cummings said, not always known as a warrior for justice, truth, and honesty, but on this occasion, I felt that a lot of what he said had the ring of truth, and I presume he has some documentation to back some of these allegations up. He seems to have been very clear that Matt Hancock promised that people would not be released from hospitals into care homes without being tested. But more and more evidence seems to be emerging that the guidance did not mention testing, in fact, instructed people to be released from hospitals into care homes without testing. And all in spite of protests from people in the care home community and the people sort of at the head of that community, those saying that this would be unsafe, their protests were ignored. So this does look like a mass killing, basically. Obviously, I'm not suggesting Matt Hancock intended that, and he has worked unbelievably hard during the pandemic, as most people in government have done. But to have lied about something like that, even in a government that lies fairly regularly, does seem pretty serious.
I mean, Matthew, as Christina said there, not saying that he intended people to die, but the question is whether or not he was reckless as to the possibility. And I've interviewed government ministers countless times over the past 9, 10, 14 months. And every time this issue came up, that mantra, a protective ring was thrown around care homes, was thrown back in my face.
Well, I agree with Christina that Dominic Cummings, a lot of his testimony was, for me anyway, came through as highly credible. The one thing that made me slightly hesitant is the way that he attacked certain people who he clearly doesn't like very much, like Matt Hancock and the Prime Minister, and was extremely generous to those he does like Sir Patrick Vallance and Rishi Sunak. So in the case of Hancock, I would say I'd like to hear his side of the story. He is, I think, a bit slippery. And I don't think he was completely candid in his press conference or in his statement to the House of Commons. But I would just say that we had a limited supply of tests. It was an unprecedented time in March 2020. I mean, there were so many things happening at the same time, so many strands of evidence and argument impinging upon decision makers. Cummings describes it as complete chaos. And I can just about imagine, depending on when we hear the other side of the story, that a fair-minded person would say that Hancock and his decision-making team were swamped, and this was not negligence, but just a frontline professional juggling contradictory concerns in real time. I don't know what the answer will ultimately be, but I wouldn't condemn Hancock on the just on the basis.
It's almost as if, Matthew, we need an inquiry sometime soon. Christina, let's move ourselves on to the story in the front of the Sunday Times, their lead story, and this will be alarming an awful lot of people. British intelligence sources telling the Sunday Times that there has perhaps been a Chinese cover-up and that the Wuhan lab leak theory is feasible.
Yes, I mean, they're not saying it's likely or that it's the most likely explanation. They are literally just saying that it's feasible. I do think opinion seems to be shifting on this, but we simply don't know at the moment. The WHO were not given proper access, not very surprisingly, in order to, when they made their investigation, and they concluded that the lab theory wasn't very likely. I must say, last year, I tended to the view, as a COVID obsessive, obviously, I tended to the view that that the lab escape theory was kind of conspiracy theory territory. But actually, after reading and reviewing the Sunday Times Insight Team's book about the government's handling of COVID and the potential origins of the virus, I changed my mind. I mean, who am I? I have no idea. But it does seem that it's not at all impossible that that's the case, because the bats are where the coronavirus is breed are thousands of miles away, and there doesn't seem to be a very plausible route for the virus to have travelled from the caves where the bats are to an animal, whether it's a pangolin or whatever, in that wet market. So we don't know, but I think at this point we can't dismiss anything out of hand. The trouble is, I don't know whether we ever will know, because clearly the Chinese government are not going to be candid about this.
Matthew, what do you think?
Well, I think it's a very important empirical question. If China have covered this up, then I think it has big also strategic implications. I mean, we're in the midst, I think, of effectively a Cold War too. China have tried to project its diplomatic, financial and other muscle around the world, One Belt, One Road, wolf warrior diplomacy, maneuvers in the South China Sea. And if it turns out that they have done this, I think it will be a PR disaster of seismic consequence and give America, which has suffered globally under Trump, an opportunity to reset the agenda and try and shape the world around a rules-based system and against an increasingly totalitarian Chinese Communist Party. So I think it's important in its own right, but has broader implications as well.
Welcome back to the press preview with me, Matthew and Christina, taking you through the papers. Matthew, let's come to you this time. 2 stories to go, and guess what? You're going to be... Is it the wedding or the football you want to talk about? Yeah, it's the football. It's the football. Good result for Chelsea. Pretty bad end to the season for Manchester City.
Yeah, for sure. Pep Guardiola, the manager of Manchester City, fantastic manager, tactically such an innovator, but I think he got the tactical plan wrong. Chelsea were outstanding. They were great in attack. They set up with superb organisation. They deserved to win. But can I just pick out one player who I think is a stone-cold genius, and that's N'Golo Kante, who is the Chelsea defensive midfielder. He's just man of the match. He tackles, his vision, his intelligence on the pitch. He was an unsung hero for Leicester, winning the Premier League, World Cup with France. What an amazing, beautiful player.
Christina, your views on the contributions of N'Golo Kante in the Champions League final?
Well, I would love to elaborate, and I hate to perpetuate stereotypes, but all I can say is that I haven't seen my bloke all evening, but I did hear some whoops of delight at one point from another room, so that's my only contribution to the subject at hand, I'm afraid.
Matthew, just one quick word from you, though. It was really, really good to see thousands of people enjoying themselves and getting into the stadium. It does feel like, in terms of sporting events, we're getting a little bit back to normal.
Wonderful sport. I know not everyone is into sport, but as an ex-professional sports person, it's a joy to see. It's a key part of our culture, for many of us, a key part of life. And the other thing, by the way, talking about football in southwest London, Brentford, the team of my father-in-law, got promoted to the Premier League today, beating Swansea in the Championship playoff final. That was another great contest. So it's wonderful to have sport back.
Yeah, just down the road from where I'm broadcasting from, in fact. So I've decided that I have been a lifelong fan of Brentford this very evening. Christina, something we can all agree on. Who doesn't love a good wedding? Tell us about the one that's on the front of the Times.
Well, Downing Street have not even confirmed that this wedding's taken place, but today, apparently, allegedly, Boris Johnson married his fiancée, Carrie Simons, in a wedding that has been planned for 6 months but kept top secret. And perhaps more surprisingly, at Westminster Cathedral. Who knew that a twice-divorced man could get married so easily in the country's Catholic cathedral? But anyway, he did, and allegedly it was a very happy occasion, and she wore a beautiful white dress, and they gazed at each other adoringly, as you should at weddings, and read vows. Don't know exactly what he said in his vows, maybe better luck this time. Anyway, good luck to them. I'm glad if they had a happy day. Not enough happiness around at the moment, so there we are.
I think you have to get permission from the bishop, but that would be an ecumenical matter. I mean, Matthew, I think the one thing we can perhaps say, weren't there stories recently that he was planning on having his wedding at Chequers next year and paying for it? You're not telling me that everything I read in the papers isn't correct, are you?
Yeah, I saw that story too. I mean, I've got to say, Christina's good wishes were the most grudgingly expressed I think I've ever seen. But I know Christina has great doubts about Boris Johnson as a prime minister. I have doubts about Boris Johnson as prime minister, but I do genuinely hope he's very happy, and Carrie too. I think I'm very pleased for them.
Well, on that bombshell, Matthew, Christina, we will see you again for more of the papers at 11:30. For now, thanks very much indeed.